Namaste everyone and welcome to another session on Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Today we will research chapter 4, verse 24 to 28. Brahman offers to the Brahman. The offering is to the fire of the Brahman. The offering is made only by the Brahman. The end result is achieved by effort of one who is absorbed in the meditation of the Brahman. Now, let us try and understand this in itself. So, first, let us define Brahman. Brahman is the cognitive state of null. That is, where there is no materiality or there is no material movement, and at the same time, that part where the cognition is also at rest. So this is called chitta vritti nirodha. That is the state where the consciousness is not moving. So how does the Brahman evolve into material entities? First, there is the Brahman, which is the state of infinite, unchanging tranquility. Then the Brahman gets a kind of an intuition. Who am I? What is happening to me? Just as we do normally, whenever we are doing nothing and we're just sitting quietly, suddenly a thought will emerge from within us. Where does that thought come from? It is coming from within us. Now, if we allow it to just go, we will continue to remain in the state of null. But the minute we engage with it, what happens? That thought becomes ours. So the thought gets a personality which is ours. Similarly, the Brahman is in the state of null, and suddenly from within it gets that thought. Who am I? And then now that thought slowly begins to get greater and greater emphasis, because there is that need to answer the question, who am I? When that happens, the Brahman has to emerge to find out who it is. But how will it emerge? You can't get something for nothing. It has to sacrifice something. So what does it do? The only thing it has to sacrifice is itself. So, the Brahman sacrifices itself. Just as I said, suppose you are sitting quietly and doing nothing, and then suddenly you get a thought, I'd like to go to buy some cake. And then if you don't act on it, the thought vanishes. But if you're feeling hungry and slowly that thought begins to get momentum, at some point, you have to act on it. And how will you act on it? You have to sacrifice something. What will you sacrifice? You will sacrifice your laziness. You will sacrifice your money. You will sacrifice yourself, get up, go to the shop to buy the cake. And that is the fundamental source on which the whole system of materiality and Sanatana Dharma is based. First, there is nothing. That nothing gets a thought, who am I? But in order to find out who am I, it needs to manifest. And in order to manifest, it has to sacrifice itself. So Brahman has to sacrifice into Brahman. And from there, the Brahman will begin to manifest. And that is precisely what he is trying to say. Brahman offers to the Brahman. The offering is to the fire of the Brahman. What is fire? Fire is a transformation agent. Now let us look at the Panchabhootas, or the 5 primordial elements. They are earth, water, fire, air, and space. The earth and space are at the two opposite ends of the spectrum. both of them will hold. They are static. Water and air flow. They carry. That is their natural state. But beyond that, they don't do anything. However, fire transforms, it changes things. So, the offering is to the fire of the Brahman, the fire that allows the Brahman to emerge from within itself. And the offering is made by the Brahman. So, the Brahman makes the offering to itself. And the end result is achieved by effort of one who is absorbed in the meditation of the Brahman. So similarly, if you are absorbed in the meditation of the Brahman, just as you went out to buy the piece of cake, suppose you sacrifice that need for identity into yourself, there is a regression. It moves inward, and that inward movement then merges with the Brahman, and that is precisely, all of this is karma, all of this is action. Without Brahman sacrificing to the Brahman, when it happens, it is a karma. If you are in a state of null and you want to buy a piece of cake, you have to move. It's a karma. It is work. It is effort. So, this is a very subtle, brilliantly designed kind of a verse which Sri Krishna tells to Arjuna. Some sacrifice only to the deities. Yogis worship the fire of the Brahman. Others sacrifice as a sacrifice. Here we need to understand the differences between some of the various terminologies which Sri Krishna uses. The first is, what is arpanam and how is it different from yajna? Arpanam is an offering. Sacrifice is an effort. So one might say arpanam is a passive activity, whereas yajna is an active offering. So when offering is made actively with more effort, that becomes yajna. In arpanam, the person offers whatever he has got to the deity. In yajna, the offer is also the same thing, except that there is a greater involvement of the identity. There is a greater release of the identity into the offering. So let us look at what he says in verse 25. What are the various forms of sacrifice? He says you can sacrifice to the devas. Who are the devas? A deva is a deity. So what are the types of devas we have? We have Ishta Deva, our favorite deity. We have Kula Deva, the family deity or the clan deity. Kula is a Sanskrit cognate of the English word clan. So the clan deity, Grama Deva or village deity. You can either sacrifice unto them or you can do a static sacrifice like an arpanam. You can sacrifice to the fire of the Brahman. Now this is the same thing that Brahman does to itself. You can sacrifice to the Brahman. That is, every time you do some work, your entire system, your identity is in a state of null. There is no identity manifesting in the activity. You can also sacrifice to sacrifice. That is, you can sacrifice to the concept of sacrifice. That is, if I am going to sacrifice, there is an identity involved. If you sacrifice that identity, that I in the sacrifice itself, so the I is sacrificed in the sacrifice, then what happens? Automatically that sacrifice goes to the Brahman, because when I is zero, then the only thing that is left there is the Brahman. Let us now look at what he says in verse 26. Organ of hearing and other senses in the fire of self-restraint are sacrificed. Sources of sound and others are sacrificed in the fire of the senses. Let us look at verse 26. What happens when senses are sacrificed in the fire of self-restraint, the sources of the sounds are sacrificed in the fires of the senses. So we need to understand some of these terminologies. The senses are sacrificed in the fires of self-restraint. What are the senses? The senses are 5 senses. These are hearing, sight, taste, touch, and these come into our system and they get collated in a central location called the manas or the cognitive apparatus. If we have to control the senses, and why should we control the senses? Because these are the primary input of information into us. We get our primary inputs through the senses. So the minute we control the collation of the senses and do not allow that information to proceed to our sense of self-worth, the self-worth will not get agitated, which means that the fire of the Brahman will be easier for us to process. But in order to sacrifice the information that comes to us through our senses, we need to be able to exercise that self-restraint. But to exercise that self-restraint, there is an application. That application is a fire. It's an effort. And that is what he is talking about here. Senses are sacrificed in the fire of self-restraint. Second that he says is that the sources of sound and others are sacrificed in the fire of the senses. Which are the sources of sound? The sources of sound can be from others. A bird chirping is a source of sound. A car's engine is a source of sound. But he also says others. That means this particular microphone is others. I'm able to see it. That means the source from where those senses come, they are also sacrificed in the fire of the senses. That means that not only are you removing the sound, the sense itself, you are also removing the place where it came from, which means that you're removing your attachment to that particular sound. So you're removing the attachment to the source of that stimulus that comes to you. So when you do that, then automatically you remove passion, you remove attachment. And that removal of passion and attachment allows you to regress within yourself and use that energy to go within yourself to sacrifice into the Brahman. Then he also talks about other sacrifices. Sacrifice the function of the senses and the movement of vital air within the self. Now you can see that Sri Krishna is slowly regressing into the self. First, what does he say? He says that sense is sacrificed at the cognitive level and you control the cognition. Then he says, look at the source of the stimulus and restrain and sacrifice that in the fire of the senses. So stop looking at the various objects around you as something important and make it neutral. Neuter everything. The information that comes is neutered without having a personality. Now he goes into the other part and says, function of the senses and the movement of air. So what happens when you get stimulus? Each of us reacts in a different manner, which is in keeping with our sense of identity. So when that happens, you start controlling the movement of air within yourself. That means the senses no longer have the ability to create or move hormones within your body in order that you will react. That means that when the air is controlled, when the air flow becomes laminar, then what happens is that your entire internal system no longer triggers your amygdala or the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenaline axis. When that does not get triggered, you are in a state of balance, or what they call homeostasis. When you are in that state of homeostasis, you are no longer getting agitated by what stimulus comes to you. So this, he is saying, that function of the senses and the movement of vital air or vayu within the self. So you contain that. And then he says, sacrifice material, whatever material you have, through even the restraint that you are exercising. See, what he is saying is, even the restraint that you are exercising in order to remove that attachment to an object, you sacrifice that also. So when you sacrifice that restraint, what happens? There is the person who's restraining, that is I, the person, is no longer there, because the restraint has been sacrificed also. He is saying sacrifice yoga. That is, this effort that we are putting in order to merge with the Brahman, sacrifice that. Sacrifice swadhyayam, that is the self-reflection that we have. Sacrifice tapas, and sacrifice all kinds of vows that you are taking. So what is he saying? Anything that you do will no longer have an I attached to it. When there is no I attached to it, there is no ahankara. When ahankara is zero, then everything that is happening around you ceases to have that effect on you. But in order to do that, you have to systematically cut off the tentacles of attachment that comes with stimulus. From the outside, first stop the stimulus at the sensory apparatus, control the cognition, then remove the attachment with the source. Thereafter, remove the impact of the stimulus on your limbic system or your entire response system, which is control your HPA axis and ensure that you are in a state of homeostasis. Thereafter, sacrifice that also. Sacrifice all that you are in terms of identity. Your whatever material attachment you have, the tapas that you do in order to to cut off those tentacles, sacrifice yoga, self-restraint, and tapas and everything, so that you're completely merged with the Brahman in every way. This is the fascinating aspect of these 5 verses. Let's be honest, this is one of the most important aspects of jnana karma sannyasa yoga, because here he is explaining what actual karma yoga, jnana karma sannyasa yoga is. Thank you.